Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Spike Week. As always, I am your host, Erik Beimfohr. You can, as always, find me on Twitter at Erik Beimfohr. And today, I wanted to talk a little bit about a topic that I don't really feel like should be controversial or kind of that crazy, but it does seem to be when you look across the industry and maybe talk to a bunch of people. It does seem to be pretty controversial, and that is stacking in best ball without the quarterback. So including multiple players from a team, multiple pass catchers from a team, but not drafting the quarterback. And so first, before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about here, what even is, stacking without the quarterback, I do think it's important to just kind of take a step back and remember, like, nothing is completely black or white. I'm not saying, the whole premise of this is not to say, well, you have to build these stacks without the quarterback. You have to go into a draft looking to get Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts and not take Matt Ryan. And that's not the case. That's certainly not the case. It's not, you should not be 100% doing really anything in best ball drafts. You shouldn't stick to 100% of any strategy. You shouldn't force, anything in your drafts. But the point really is to say there's a lot more value in building out some of these stacks, kind of as secondary stacks without that quarterback. And there's quite a few reasons why. And so the first real reason as to why that's valuable is just simply how replaceable those points are at quarterback. I'm not even sure people really realize how replaceable quarterback points are. And so why are they replaceable? Well, first of all, you only have one quarterback spot. You get to draft however many you want. Typically, I would say 2. You get to draft those quarterbacks. There's only so many starting quarterbacks. There's only so many quarterbacks even getting drafted. And even the low end, right? Even the low end of quarterbacks are putting up a respectable number of points. Last year, as an example, looking at really just the quarterbacks that played, most of the season. Jared Goff was the 15th best quarterback in total points. Teddy Bridgewater, 17th. Those guys averaged at least, almost basically 17 fantasy points per game. Kyler Murray was the number 1 quarterback. Again, filtering out the Dax and some of these guys who missed a bunch of games, Joe Burrows. Kyler Murray was number 1, up there, right there with Josh Allen and Mahomes. They were all extremely close, right around 25 or 26 fantasy points per game. So when you drop down to quarterbacks, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, even on into the 20s, you're getting quarterbacks putting up 17, on average 17 points a week. And now how does that distribution of those 17 points? Sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's less. Maybe you're Teddy Bridgewater and you hover around 17 every single week. But the point being, you can find points at quarterback. Like, there's 20 plus guys that can go get you almost 20 points a week. And comparatively to the top end, those guys, the Kylers, Josh Allens, Mahomes, Lamar, Dak, etc., certainly are giving you a much higher ceiling and a much higher average points per game, but they're not distancing themselves so easily. There is a lot of value, in my opinion, in those kind of elite guys. They have slightly less replaceable points, but the point really is, overall, holistically across the entire position, it's the most replaceable position on your fantasy roster, and you only need one of them. So that's the kind of baseline premise for what we're talking about as to why maybe the QB is not that important in your stack. And yet everyone goes out of their way, right? I drafted some guys that I get very, very frequently would be like DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. This is maybe even my favorite example. DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. I love DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. I really like the Panthers for a myriad of reasons. I won't rehash it all for you here. You can probably read about it I wrote about them in a Stacks article. I wrote about Robbie and wide receivers article. I've probably tweeted about these guys. I talk too much about the Panthers. Joe Brady is the man. But I get those guys a lot. I really like their value in drafts, especially for best ball. I just think that they're undervalued in drafts. However, I am typically not going out of my way to draft Sam Darnold, even if I get those Panthers players, unless it makes sense in the team that I'm drafting. I am typically getting I'm typically getting a Kyler or a Dak or a Lamar or one of these elite tier quarterbacks the way that I'm drafting. And so if the draft plays out where it makes sense to take to kind of punt quarterback down to Sam Darnold as my second quarterback in that build, I will do so. But I'm also not forcing that. What if I get George Kittle and I take Trey Lance? There's no reason, if I've spent the draft capital on these two elite high upside quarterbacks, to then take another one in Sam Darnold, even when I have his two receivers. I don't want to say wasting, because it's not wasting a roster spot, but those points are so like almost bankable between the guys that I have already drafted that attaching on another quarterback is almost wasting that roster spot on a position that I might be able to actually use, right? Taking a kind of flyer on a running back or a wide receiver. If they hit a spike week, if Deshaun Jackson in the 17th round hits a spike week, I'm using that score and it's going to be really valuable to me, compared to I might use a Sam Darnold score a couple times throughout the course of the year, and I'm gaining very few points. I'm certainly gaining very few points in my roster, right? Because he has to outscore, let's in this example, Trey Lance and Kyler. And when he does, how many points is he actually going to outscore them by? Very few. So I'm gaining very few points in my roster, and then I'm not gaining anything on the field, right? Even the Sam Darnold isn't going to be the QB1. He's probably not even going to be in the top 5 on his spike weeks. And so you can still consume the benefits of that team's spike weeks through those pass catchers. And a big reason why you can do so is kind of running quarterback versus non-running quarterback. Sam Darnold, again, I guess he might be my example, but there's plenty of them. Sam Darnold runs a little bit, but compared to the Kyler Murrays, Lamar Jacksons, Trey Lance, Josh Allen, right? All these guys, even Russell Wilson to a slightly lesser example. We've seen how running at the quarterback position is not even just a perk. It's not even just a bonus. It's almost a necessity to, presenting real upside at the position. Kyler Murray, we talked a little bit earlier, Kyler Murray and Josh Allen were the top fantasy quarterbacks last year. We saw what Lamar did 2 years ago. And when we look across the entire top 10 of quarterbacks last season, again, throwing Dak out. Dak did ran for several touchdowns before he got hurt. But even setting aside Dak, you have Kyler, Josh Allen, Mahomes, who can run. He's not a huge volume runner, but he can run. Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers had to throw 50 touchdowns in order to even get into the top 5 of fantasy scoring. He was the MVP and he threw an ungodly amount of touchdowns, and he still couldn't even get into the top 3 of fantasy scoring. Russell Wilson, Deshaun Jackson, Ryan Tannehill. Tom Brady cracked the top 10. There's so you have 2 quarterbacks that didn't run, and then Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert. So the entire top 10 is littered with runners last season. And so it has become almost a necessity in order to present upside and floor and a floor, right? Lamar Jackson didn't have a particularly great season last year. He's probably disappointing on a lot of, in a lot of different ways, but he still presented a floor as, top 10 quarterback simply by the fact that he runs so much and he's such an effective runner. So this idea of running quarterback versus non-running quarterback has kind of gone from, oh, that's a really nice added bonus for this guy to be able to run for 50 yards and a touchdown, to, if you want to have one of the top quarterbacks, you need the running. And so if you're drafting running quarterbacks, in the example I used before, you've drafted Kyler Murray. You've already drafted Kyler Murray, but you happen to stumble into you stumbled into Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts, again, that example, or you stumbled into Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen in your draft. You may think, oh, I have to get Kirk Cousins, right? I have to reach for Kirk Cousins because I have these guys. And it's simply not true, because Kirk Cousins, even when he has the spike week passing the ball, even when Matt Ryan has the spike week passing the ball, it's really hard for him to get points that your other quarterbacks aren't getting if they're running. Sure, in his big weeks, you might gain a couple of points, but by having his receivers, you're gaining most of the value. The big weeks in a passing offense, you benefit the most from the pass catchers, right? Because they can distance themselves. When Justin Jefferson has 180 yards and 3 touchdowns, when he and Adam Thielen both go for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Kirk Cousins throws for 350 and 4. Kirk Cousins scored 30 points, and that's a great score. If Kirk Cousins throws for 350 and 4, he scores 30 points. But if Trey Lance throws for 250 and 2 and runs for 60 yards and a touchdown, which in the box score doesn't seem to look quite as great, he scored 30 points too. From the 60-yard, 12 rushing points. 12 rushing points. That's 300 yards passing that Kirk Cousins has to do in order to match those 12 rushing points. And so those points are just so replaceable, and they're not even it's replaceable by any form of quarterback. Just simply taking the snaps at quarterback in an NFL offense gives you this baseline of points. And now we have this running factor that exists that you just don't have to go out of your way to get these non-runners to attach to your, stacks that kind of fell into your lap. If everything works out that way, right? You've drafted Kyler in the 5th or 6th round, and you happen to stumble across either those, those stacks that I mentioned, right? You got the Panthers, you got the Falcons or the Vikings, the Bucks. You got those wide receivers that are all fallen in the 2nd through the whatever rounds from those teams. If Matt Ryan, Kirk Cousins, Tom Brady, etc., fall into your lap and it makes sense, as your QB2, by all means, the benefits of that correlation and that stack still exists. But you shouldn't be going out of your way to reach on those types of players, because the benefits are not as great. The value of that quarterback, even in that stack, is so much less than maybe the public thinks it is, maybe even than I thought it was until not all that long ago. And moving on to this next bullet, if you're watching on YouTube, what it really does do that you don't think about is it maximizes your roster upside if you don't go out of your way to force these stacks with these types of QBs. The Matt Ryan is maybe my favorite example. Matt Ryan, Tom Brady, they're quality quarterbacks. They're going to be steady eddies for you throughout the entire season, but they just don't offer you much ability to distance yourself at the quarterback position compared to some of these other quarterbacks like a Kyler, Lamar, etc. So it allows you to still get the benefits of that offense and that stack while capitalizing on the guys who might be able to distance you at the quarterback position, right? I use Trey Lance. You're probably sick of hearing me talk about Trey Lance, but he's a good example. Why force and reach on Matt Ryan in the whatever round, 11th round, when you can take Trey Lance as your second quarterback? Trey Lance has, he has significant risk, of course. Maybe Matt Ryan is a little safer, a little more bankable points. But Trey Lance with the running in that offense has the potential to have monster weeks and destroy that ADP. Absolutely destroy that ADP. To a lesser extent, you have the Trevor Lawrences and Justin Fields. It seems like these rookies are the guys that make this up the most, but you have these runners who simply by the fact that they were going to run and use their legs, they're going to run for touchdowns. They're going to pick up yards on the ground that these other guys are not going to. You're maximizing your upside at that quarterback position, and you can still stack those guys. I can still have a 49er stack with Trey Lance and George Kittle. I'm not giving up a stack. No one is saying you have to draft Trey Lance and not draft a 49er. If you draft George Kittle in the 3rd round and you get I mentioned, you get Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen on that team, you can take Trey Lance over Kirk Cousins and not worry about completing the Viking stack with Kirk Cousins because you still have that stack. Now you use that one of those 18 roster positions instead of Kirk Cousins. You use it on a running back who can maximize the running back position, the upside of your running back position, or another wide receiver or a tight end. Because that third quarterback, that lower upside quarterback that doesn't run is not maximizing your entire, you only get 18 spots. And so when you use it on another quarterback that, he's going to have some good weeks and you'll use his score here and there, but he doesn't have the potential to blow his ADP out of the water simply just because of the archetype of player that he is. So combining these different factors, you get this path, you still get to see the benefits of that quote unquote stack while maximizing your roster, putting the puzzle pieces together on your roster in the most effective way to create this upside. You have these super high upside quarterbacks that can finish at the top, right? Kyler was the QB1 last year, depending upon what you're looking at and the sample size of games played. Kyler or pick your poison, Dak. Lamar clearly has the upside to be the QB1. You're getting these guys. Trey Lance is a guy that I believe can jump up into that category. But if you prefer Trevor Lawrence, right? Trevor Lawrence is a good runner. Justin Fields. You get these guys and you use a couple of them and you still have a stack with them, right? I'm pairing Trevor Lawrence with DJ Chark or Marvin Jones. I'm pairing Justin Fields with Allen Robinson or Darnell Mooney. And I'm pairing Trey Lance with whoever. And so I'm still getting the benefits of stacking and I'm getting the benefits of really maximizing the upside of my quarterback position. Then I ignore, the Kirk Cousins, but I still get the benefits of when the Vikings have a big passing week, it's flowing through those two guys or maybe Irv Smith. It's flowing through those guys. So now I really have another stack on my roster, which is really beneficial, particularly for the playoff weeks. I have an extra stack on my roster. but I didn't have to force in the quarterback position, so I can maximize the upside of my roster as a whole, because I get to use that on another running back, right? Maybe I'm in like this team that I've kind of outlined here. Maybe you're a little bit thinner at running back, so now I can take in that round, the 12th round, I can take Latavius Murray, or I can pick your guy, right? Gus Edwards or Darrell Henderson or whoever. You can take a running back there who has a ton of upside, and I don't have to attach that quarterback because those points are so replaceable, like we talked about before. And so what that allows you to do is gain points on your opponents, which is ultimately what we're trying to do, right? It really is not a math equation, but kind of a math equation. I have X amount of roster spots that I'm filling with my 18-man roster. Now I have X amount of starting roster spots that I'm filling every week with my 18-man roster. And so in order to beat my opponents, I have to score more, right? Well, how do I do that? Here's the positions, lay out those positions. Where am I gaining points on you? And how can I maximize the amount of positions I gain points on you? And the easiest way to do that is the fact that you have these onesie positions where like you only have to start one, and the quarterback is the one where they're, the least valuable, because everybody's getting, we just talked about everybody's getting 17 or 18 points a week. Even in not good weeks, you're getting 17 or 18 points at quarterback. So don't go out of your way to draft the guys that are just going to get you 17 or 18 pretty much every week and don't have the upside to blow away your competition. You can get guys that have many more paths to you gaining a few points at quarterback, and then using the rest of your roster, using the rest of those 18 picks to gain points, right? Latavius Murray has more potential in that round to gain you points when you already have Kyler and Trey Lance than does Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is going to gain you very few points if things, again, going back to the drafting is if you're right. If you're right about Kyler Murray and Trey Lance, there's going to be very few weeks where Kirk Cousins gains you any points on your opponents. However, if you draft Latavius Murray in that round or Darrell Henderson, and they happen to come through with usable weeks for you, they're definitely going to gain you points. They're absolutely going to gain you points, really valuable points at that RB2 position that allow you to really jump past your opponents. And so that's all we're really trying to do. Is think about this in a way that we're crafting this team. We have these 18 guys and we're crafting this positional team. And so how do we go about doing that in a way that maximizes our upside and maximizes our ability to gain points on our opponents while still benefiting from the aspects of stacking, right? Stacking is good, both from a correlation perspective and from a, making a bet on an offense. You're making a bet on the Vikings offense when you draft Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen or DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. But that doesn't mean what I think most have thought for a long time is that means now I have to get the quarterback too. And I think we've gotten smarter. We now know that that's not necessarily the case. There are, of course, as I outlined at the beginning, times where it makes sense to grab that guy. And I have some of them. I've drafted Carson Wentz and Sam Darnold and some of these guys. But if I'm making my absolute optimal team, and what I've seen play out a lot over the course of a lot of drafts, 100 plus drafts that I've done now, is a lot more stacking without the quarterback. And I think it is a very underutilized approach to gaining upside and giving ourselves a shot at those top prizes, those $1 million top prizes on both Underdog and DraftKings. So that's going to do it today for this. As always, leave me any comments and drop a comment, smash the like button, all those cliche fun things that everybody likes to say on their shows and podcasts. And I will be back tomorrow with another fun episode of Spike Week. So thanks, guys. We're out of here.